Hey, welcome to the YMCA, and today we have Jim West from the Academy of Lifelong Learning, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what they offer and how you can access it and answer any questions you might have. So I'm going to hand it off to Jim West.
Great. I really appreciate the invitation to come and talk about one of my favorite activities. Officially, it's known as the Academy for Lifelong Learning, but because that's such a mouthful, we typically refer to it just by its acronym A.L.L. And so during my presentation, most of the time, I'll skip the long version and go right to A.L.L. I think it's only fair that you know something about me to know where I'm coming from when I promote A.L.L. I moved to Bellingham about 15 years ago from Chicago. And one of the requirements, in addition to being a pleasant, smaller town, was one that had a university associated with it. My requirements were vague. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to have access to some sort of educational opportunity. I'm a very passionate fan of A.L.L. So to give you some idea, in the past 5 years, I've taken 70 courses from A.L.L. My education is in engineering. So of course, I'm a little bit short on history, literature, all the things that are of interest now that I'm no longer involved in engineering. So in these 70 courses I've taken, now these are for an engineer. I've taken a course called The Lyric Poetry of Ancient Greece. Hydraulic fracking for oil. Does it work and is it worth it? Understanding the US founding documents. Even one in music. You say you want an evolution, the Beatles music, and one on religion, the golden age of Islam. And that's just a sampling of the different things that you can take. But I have to confess, A.L.L. is not for everyone. So if you don't rush up and join right afterward, I'll understand it. My wife has attended maybe 2 or 3 A.L.L. things while I've attended 70. So it's not her cup of tea. She'd rather garden, cook, and read her books. So what I'd like to do is, if you have questions, we will have time at the end. However, if you have questions that'll help clarify some point during the presentation, we can certainly take the questions as we go along. So we're going to get into screen sharing now. So for some reason, it doesn't want to share.
Uh-oh.
Oh, here we go.
Did it go?
Here we go.
Yep, we see it. It's coming. There it goes.
Being honorary this morning. There we go. So there are many programs throughout the country that are talking about adult education. If you go back historically, adult education was pretty serious academic stuff. It was really intended for people that had either achieved their GED or maybe even a college education, and they wanted to continue on in their career. So these were pretty serious academic programs. However, what we're talking about is a program that's really designed for adults that want to, in their leisure time, learn about new topics or learn more about topics they're familiar with. So this is the type of adult education we're talking about, the more enjoyable type. Now, there are many names for these programs, but they all share some common characteristics. They tend to be aimed more at people on the high side of 55. The participants tend to be retirees, and they cover a very diverse range of topics. They encourage discussion and exchange. So these tend not to be lecture type courses. They're more of an exchange for people. The beauty of it is there's no prerequisites required. If you're interested, you're in. That's all that it requires. And they do not come with tests. They do not come with grades. They do not come with credit hours or degrees. It's just for the pure enjoyment of it. This makes it a very low pressure environment, and you can participate at the level you want to participate. If you want to be very outspoken, fine. If you want to observe and learn, that's also fine. Of all the adult education programs in the United States, the best known is one called OSHER. And this was a gentleman who made a fair amount of money, and he set up a program that distributes grants to adult education programs throughout the country. So the Bernard Osher Foundation started issuing grants in the year 2001. And today they have over 120 universities and colleges that are funded by Osher grants. This would be a wonderful way to find money, but we did not qualify when Osher was out trying to give away money. He required, or the foundation required, that you have 500 members, and we were not nearly that size. So we are not involved with Osher. And unfortunately today, as we continue to grow and could perhaps meet the minimum size requirements, they're no longer issuing grants. Their whole program, they continue with the existing people, but they're not issuing new grants. A.L.L. was founded in 1979, and we've already celebrated our 20th birthday, and we're coming up on our 25th. When the program was originally founded, it was called the Institute for Learning in Retirement, which is a pretty accurate description, but it didn't have that ring to it. So within a year, the name was changed to Academy for Lifelong Learning. I think most of you know we are associated with Western Washington University, and you might wonder how that relationship came about. When A.L.L. was founded, it was an independent program, but a number of people from A.L.L. went to Western Washington University to speak to a provost. It turns out one of the fundamental requirements or goals of Western Washington University is to have an outreach program to the community. So we were able to form a relationship with what is now at Western called the Outreach and Continuing Education Group. And our program is very much like the ones I described earlier. We tend to work with people 55 and older. They have the time to do this. They tend to be retired, and that's pretty easy to tell if you look at the catalog. Almost all courses are taught during the day. We have some extraordinary instructors. A number of the people that teach our courses are retired teachers or retired professors. One of my favorite examples is a gentleman I've taken 4 courses from. He has 2 PhDs. He has one in mathematics from MIT, and he has another PhD in music from Harvard. These are qualified people. Of course, to have the intellect to do this is one thing, but to have the ability to teach people that don't have the same knowledge you do is remarkable. And this fellow, for all his education, is able to communicate with us and teach us some very interesting courses. Our courses tend to focus more on liberal arts and science, but there are things that we typically do not get involved in. We rarely teach a course that's hobby related or that's a how-to course. We pretty much stick with courses that are more general in nature. And part of that is we don't want to compete with Whatcom Community College and Bellingham Technical College. So they teach many courses, how to do photography, how to do creative welding. We typically are not into those sorts of things. However, on occasion we do that. My favorite how-to or hands-on course was a course that was taught on wine tasting. So we do get involved in that sort of program occasionally. How is A.L.L. funded since we didn't qualify for an Osher grant? We are a totally self-funded group. We do not get money from Western Washington, and the source of our revenue comes from the fees for courses, the fees that are charged for the excursions that we have, and also from an annual membership fee that we have. So that's the money that makes us run. We do have expenses because we're required to pay for things like classroom venues, which of course is a major expense. We also pay some of our instructors for their time. And then we do have administrative fees with Western Washington University. We find it very advantageous to work with Western Washington. For instance, you could imagine they have a registration system that handles 10,000 students, and they're able to handle our registration for A.L.L. courses. So that's a natural fit. They also provide us with some marketing, and they also do some of the communications work for us. But these are all things for which we pay a fee to Western Washington. A.L.L. is 100% volunteer powered. Our people that volunteer make up all the work that's done by A.L.L. There are a couple of committees, and this is the sort of thing that if you're interested in A.L.L. and you want to come as a student participant, that's great. If you want to be involved as a volunteer, we're always looking for people that have a passion for something like A.L.L. So we have a volunteer board of directors. We have a curriculum committee. The curriculum committee is the one who finds the topics and the teachers that we use in our courses. We have an excursion committee that sets out to find different things that we could travel to see that are of interest to our folks. Then there's a new one called A.L.L. Talks, and this occurs on the third Friday of each month during the noontime. So it's a luncheon seminar, and it's 1 hour long, and it talks about different topics. That's a new innovation this year. And then we have a marketing committee and a recently formed fundraising committee. We basically have 2 terms. So A.L.L. runs classes from September until May. So there's a fall winter session, which goes September to early January. And then there's the winter spring section, which goes from January to May. Our course load is very light in December due to all the conflicts that people have with their schedules. So let's talk about A.L.L. in the good old days. That's 2 years ago before COVID whacked us. We were teaching about 23 courses per term or 46 courses a year. We were doing 3 excursions per term. These are general numbers, but that's the sort of activity we had. And these courses that we taught were held basically all over Bellingham in different venues, depending on what was available. So when we do the venues, some were quite big, some were quite small, depending on class size. We're always concerned about accessibility and parking. And to give you an example of how that enters in, Western Washington itself has some of the most beautiful meeting facilities you've ever seen. But if you've ever been to Western Washington and tried to park on their campus, you'll know that's not very advantageous. So we avoid Western Washington just because of the parking situation is so difficult for all of our participants. The one that we're using the most now is the Bellingham Cruise Terminal. And if you've been there, you know it's a beautiful facility. And we're using that now because it has generous space and we can do our social distancing. So as I say, the excursions are typically 3 per term. And some of the things we've done, just to give you an idea of the variety, one group went to Hanford, Washington to see LIGO. Well, I wasn't familiar with LIGO, but it's the Laser Interferometry Gravitational Observatory. And it's a very scientific thing, but the folks who went found it extremely interesting. We've also visited various parts of the Lewis and Clark Trail. We've toured the Ballard Locks in Seattle, and we've had numerous day trips to Vancouver. So there's quite a variety that the excursions have done in the past. And then about 5 years ago, a new feature was added to A.L.L. in addition to the courses and the excursions. And that was a thing called interest groups. And it turns out there are 3 different interest groups. And these are groups that meet typically once a month. So there is a contemporary reading discussion group, very much like a book club, but it's totally driven by the folks who are interested. They get together, vote on what books, be they fiction or nonfiction, that they're interested in. Someone volunteers from the group to lead the discussion, and then they meet, as I say, once a month. Then there's a group called the History Discussion Group. Same sort of format. The folks get together that are interested in history. They pick a particular time or era they want to talk about at the next meeting. Someone volunteers to teach it, and then they meet. Again, that is once a month. And finally, there's a group called World Affairs. And we decided that we should not focus only on things that are happening in the United States, but we should broaden our exposure. So this is a group that picks topics that are more global in nature. And again, they meet once a month and talk about a variety of topics. For instance, in recent meetings, they've talked about COVID from a worldwide perspective, not just what is happening in Washington State or the United States, but how is COVID affecting the world? We had one on the Canadian healthcare system and how does that compare to the US healthcare system? That was a real eye-opener when you find out how many things we misunderstand about the Canadian system. And then we had one on Africa, the growing population, and how will it affect the economy? So prior to COVID, the way we would promote courses is we had a printed catalog, and that printed catalog was mailed to all our members, plus it was distributed to various libraries and stores, Village Books as an example. And we, in my generation, really enjoyed the printed catalog. And then another thing we did is we would have 2 general sessions, one before each of the terms. So one in the fall and one in the late winter or early spring. And this would typically be at the cruise terminal. And this is a photograph of folks at the cruise terminal listening to previews of upcoming courses. You can see the folks in the foreground are studying their catalogs intently. And then the people who are going to teach courses come in and give a short presentation, no more than 5 minutes, about their course and what they're going to cover. And it gives you a wonderful opportunity to see the dynamics of the person as a speaker or lecturer. I almost quit going to these preview courses because they would cause me a problem. I would have already been through my catalog. I would have picked out the 3 or 4 courses that I was going to take that term. And then some hyper energy super instructor would get up there and give their talk, and I'd sign up for another course. So I found the preview courses sort of addictive, and that's probably why I'm at 70 courses. But now COVID appeared. We can say 2 years ago, it's right at that number, I guess. And I call it the great disruptor. Boy, it threw us for a loop. All of a sudden, as everywhere and everything at the YMCA, you can't get together, you can't go anyplace, you can't do anything. And it really caused us to make the big change so that everything became Zoom. We could no longer meet in person. We were Zoomaholics. And Zoom has some pluses and some minuses. The minuses are pretty significant. I think the biggest one was the loss of the ability to meet people face to face. No matter how good Zoom is and how good the technology is, there's a dynamic when you're next to somebody chatting before the session, during the coffee break, after the session. And of course, that was totally lost with Zoom. We also had, again, and this has something to do with my generation, some folks who had struggles with the technology of Zoom. They may not have the computer equipment, or they may not feel at ease with it. So that was a problem. Even though we offered and taught low pressure Zoom tutor courses for people who wanted to learn how to use it, but it was a problem. In fact, we have people today who will not participate in any A.L.L. function that involves Zoom. They're just against it. To give you some idea of the impact of this, our annual memberships went down 65%. The number of courses we taught went down 60%. And as I told you earlier, we're funded by those things. So it's had a really significant impact on us, but it's affecting everybody in the world. So we've learned to live with that. Excursions, of course, had to be stopped totally. There was just no way you could get people on a bus or someplace together with all the restrictions. But as we always keep looking for a bright side to things, there were some pluses to Zoom. And I think one of the best examples would be the fact that I mentioned earlier, we had a course on Africa and the economy and the population growth. It was taught by a gentleman in South Africa via Zoom. So Zoom allows you to take away the distance problem of anything. We now have participants and lecturers from all over the world. Since Zoom started, we've had classes with people that were teaching from Canada, from England, from Australia, from Russia. So that's a plus of Zoom. I don't know how we'll integrate that because that's actually been quite a good thing for us. On the other hand, you get some really funny stories if you're involved in Zoom. I've seen people eat their lunch, fix their hair, clean their house, and put on their makeup. It's just amazing when we get in front of a camera and get relaxed, we forget the camera's there. So Zoom has some interesting stories. I'm surprised there's not a Saturday Night Live skit about that. It would work. But now the good news is we're coming out of all the strict things to do with COVID. Of course, it seems to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but we are making progress. First off, how are we promoting courses and excursions now that we're coming out of Zoom? One of the changes we made was we had to discontinue the printed catalog. As you can imagine, printing and distributing a catalog is pretty expensive. So we've decided to do away with that, and we now make our information available electronically. The advantage of that, however, is we're required now to make changes very quickly. We have a course schedule that starts next week. All of a sudden, something happens with COVID requirements or with the instructor, and we can no longer offer that course, or it's in a different location. Dealing with that electronically is easy because you can make that change in a heartbeat. If it's a printed catalog, once you put ink to paper, you're done. You really have great difficulty changing that. So in place of the picture that you see here, being at the cruise terminal, we are again using the electronic benefits that we can find. And where our instructors are comfortable, we ask them to record a 2 or 3 minute preview of their course, which we then put on YouTube. In fact, I'd never thought this would happen, but A.L.L has its own YouTube channel. So you can go to this channel and you can watch previews of courses that are coming up. And these are really well done. So I'd like to take just a few minutes and show you one of the examples of this.
I want to introduce Rosemary Bowles.
Can you hear that?
Her course is Tales with Tales, How to Make Your Stories Wag. It will start on January 6th. A.L.L is so pleased to have Rosemary take the time from her busy teaching schedule in the College of Education at Western, where she says that she has taught for ages. As we have thought through this past year about how to pass our legacy on to our children and our grandchildren, we are eager to listen to Rosemary share her skills about storytelling with us, as she is a founding member of the Bellingham Storytellers Guild. Welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you, Miss Shu. I am so excited to be back teaching storytelling again. Some of you might have taken my class last year where we talked about heirloom storytelling, our own stories from our own lives that we want to pass on to the next generation. But now, this time, I want to talk about storytelling in general. I want to talk about the fact that we love stories. Humans love stories. Don't we always want to know what's going to happen? Don't you get caught up in a book, or someone's telling a story of something that's happened, or maybe it's a folk tale with 3 characters and there's a quest and they're off to find something, and how is it going to end? Is it going to be happy ever after? Human beings love stories. We really do. And we love it when somebody tells a story in an engaging way, with a twinkle in their eye, with some air of curiosity, body movements and actions, voices, and all kinds of elements that make a story really exciting. And all of us know what it's like to listen to a storyteller who really captures our attention. And in this class, I'm going to help you be one of those people so that you can tell stories to each other, learn how to tell a really good joke with a great punchline, maybe. Maybe you have grandchildren that you would love to be able to tell them stories and learn them. We'll talk about how to choose good stories, how to learn them, and learn a process that's not about memorization, but about learning the story through an imaginative process. And that's going to be really key to how you make your storytelling really engaging and natural and spontaneous. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to teaching you another way of storytelling. I would welcome back those of you who took my class last time, and very much welcome those of you who would like to take it this time. So I'm deciding I'm going to pretty much do a series of storytelling types of classes each year, and we'll all become better speakers, better storytellers, and better lovers of story because of it. I look forward to seeing you in January.
I hope that Rosemary gave you a sense of what I was talking about, how if you listen to these people, all of a sudden you're intrigued. When I first saw her course listed on our website, I thought, yeah, okay, that's interesting. But now I watch her and there is such a vitality and charm about her that I'm signing up for the course. Here I go again. It's just a difficult thing. But anyway, we actually this is a link to our A.L.L. YouTube channel, and I can provide all these links to Tammy if you're interested in them. If you go to that link, this is the sort of thing you'll find. It's a typical YouTube spread, but it's got all the previews that our people have put up from earlier. So it's a good way to get a better sense of, are these people interesting when they talk or whatever. So I encourage you to do that. So in our classrooms, and you can tell certainly these are pre-COVID, this is the sort of thing we would have a lecturer. This fellow happens to be a PhD from the University of Pittsburgh, who teaches Greek and Roman literature. And he's a super dynamic speaker and makes it very interesting. So I've even been to Dante's Inferno with this man. It's pretty interesting stuff. Sometimes they're much smaller classes, depending on the interest. Sometimes they're large classes and you get lots of things. But this is typical of pre-COVID. If you were to go to one of these today, you would be wearing your mask and you would be socially distanced. But that's the situation the world's in. So here are the courses that are coming up for November, December, and January. This is all on our website, and I'll give you a link to that. You can see, for instance, down here in the January course, Tales with Tales, How to Make Your Stories Wag. That's Rosemary's course. And so you can click through these things. And as I say, I'll give you the link for this, and you can find out more about when it is, how much it costs, that sort of thing. Excursions are not going to start until the spring. And again, we're just waiting to see where COVID goes and where the rules go, but we're working on excursions in the spring with the hopes that the COVID numbers will continue to improve and will indeed be able to do that. But to give you an idea of what excursions have been like in the past, there's a group off on an excursion trip. So you can see they're very popular. This one is actually in the Electricity Museum here in Bellingham, and folks go on a tour. And of course, typically we'll end up with a private tour and one of the docents to take us through and tell us what's going on. And here's one of my favorites. We're at a winery. You're noticing a theme here and things that I like to do. So these are things that have been covered in the past on these. A.L.L. Talks, which is our newest venue, and will be in our third week or our third session coming up. So far, we've had a session on traveling in Japan alone and economically. So this was a fellow who had extensive experience in Japan, lived there many years. And as he was able to say, you should feel very comfortable going on your own. Here are the things that you can do that will make it a very economic trip. And it was just a fascinating seminar. The next A.L.L. Talks was one about relationships with your dog. And if I can give you the basic outcome of what he taught is that you need to be taught, not your dog. So generally, that's the situation when dogs aren't behaving well. It's the owners who aren't behaving well. And then coming up in November, we have a fellow that says, you need to exercise your brain. And so he's going to teach us some things about game theory. Again, these sessions are generally an hour long. They're unrelated one to the other. So you can go to the one in November, skip the one in December, or whatever it is that interests you. The one in December, by the way, one of our members worked as a volunteer in Burma with the refugees, and she's going to relate some of her experiences to us, which is pretty neat. And then the interest groups will continue on. So this is a summary of the interest groups: the contemporary reading discussion group, the history discussion group, and the world affairs. Personal note on these, I tend not to attend every one. If they're working on a book I find interesting, I'll go to that session. If they're talking about some period of history I'm interested in, I go to that one. But again, there's no requirement that you continue. It's not like watching the serial event on TV where if you miss one, you don't know what happened last week. These are pretty independent things. So here's a summary chart, and it talks about, so for instance, here are the things that we do, courses, excursion talks, etc. Here are the things that might be required. So if you take courses, you are not required to have an annual membership. There is a fee, yes. You must register, yes. Will it be face-to-face or Zoom? Depending primarily on the instructor, it may be face-to-face or it may be Zoom. We are not at this time Zooming live classes. So, some people do hybrids where they teach a class in person and Zoom it simultaneously. We are not doing that. If you go to the history discussion group, no annual membership is required. There is no fee. There is no registration. It is Zoom only. So we have a variety of things that we think can fit everybody. This is the link to get to the web page, and the web page is hosted by Western Washington. And if we can't copy the web page fast enough, obviously, if you go to Western Washington and put in lifelong learning, Google will find it for you. And then Google will probably then report where you're dialing in from to somebody, but we'll just have to live with that. So once you get here, you'll find this page and it will lead you to everything you want to know. You want to know about A.L.L, you want to know about courses, you want to know about A.L.L talks, a number of frequently asked questions, and you can link through a number of pages and you should have good luck answering almost all of your questions. So at this time, I will entertain any questions you might have. Again, down here, I'm Jim West, and I have no official title, so I'm just an A.L.L enthusiast. That's my email address and my phone number. So if you wanted to call me for anything, that's fine. I encourage the contact. So I'll stop sharing and see if there are any questions.
You guys can unmute if you want to ask a question, or you can put a question in the chat.
Maybe this is Catherine. Thank you, Jim. I'll just make a comment. I go to the contemporary readings and the discussion of world affairs, and occasionally a class when I'm in town. And I can say that these are really, really rewarding experiences, both because of what we learn as well as the people that we meet in our community. So I think Jim did just a fabulous job of describing a pretty diverse set of offerings and a way that your lives in Whatcom County could be seriously enriched. So if you're at all interested, it's low pressure, as Jim was saying, and I would strongly encourage you to join us.
It's also been a fabulous way for many people, particularly if they've moved to Bellingham, to make new friends and acquaintances that share common interests. And one thing I want to say, because of the environment we all live in today, one of our interest groups had covered both the 2016 election and the 2020 election. Now, if you can imagine a potential group getting together with different views on the elections and turning into chaos, the potential exists. People felt very passionately. But I have to tell you, I attended all those sessions, and there was not a single harsh word directed at participants. There were harsh words directed at the candidates and some of the things. But the civility of the people that attend these courses is really refreshing. You can't stand in line at a Starbucks or someplace and say, boy, I sure think that Trump's a crazy guy, without somebody having something to say to you. We do not get that reaction from our people. It's a group that's interested in learning. I don't know that you'll convince me of your viewpoint, but I respect it and I will listen to it. The civility among attendees at A.L.L is just astonishing. So that's an editorial.
And I would wholeheartedly agree. I've seen that in practice a lot of times.
Excellent. Does anybody else have a question, comment? Anybody attend classes like Catherine? Go ahead, Jenny.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would just like to say how much I appreciate A.L.L. and also that I found out about A.L.L. through my attendance at the YMCA about 8 to 10 years ago. And it's always been, I followed it through every quarter, every semester, taking classes. And it's been so uplifting and enlightening in many areas. I started out with Greek history and drama and went to China and various other more contemporary subjects. But I want to thank you so much for keeping it going and for your good presentation today.
Thank you.
I see that Becky is online here, and Becky was one of the original organizers, I think, for A.L.L. Becky,
Yes, I'm here.
weren't you one of the original organizers for A.L.L.?
It happens that I'm one of the founding mothers. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Becky, didn't you teach courses on India?
Yes, I've taught
Yeah, okay.
about
I
8 courses.
attended those. Yeah.
Yeah, I knew you were in one of them. Anyway, it's marvelous that the whole effort to keep the A.L.L. going in spite of the pandemic and the restrictions and all that. I'm in tremendous admiration because it's a heroic thing. It's such a wonderful service to the community to have those learning opportunities and social opportunities. It's just great that you people could do it.
Thank you. We are trying to do a serious outreach program because we have loyal people like yourselves who know about A.L.L. But I know in my neighborhood, if somebody says, well, what did you do this past week? And I said, oh, I was at A.L.L. And they go, well, what is that? We really need to get the word out more effectively.
Yes, that's always been an ongoing effort to do that. Anyway, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have something to say, Jim. You already sold me, so I want to take that how to make your stories wag. That gal's fantastic, and yeah, who doesn't want to make their stories wag? So good job. That was very clever what you did there.
Well, it was enjoyable. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah,
Okay.
it sounds like our exercise people are coming in, so thank you so much for sharing today.
Great. Thank you.
Jim.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.